Wild red fox begged humans for help. What happened next shocked everyone. The morning fog hung low over the state park, clinging to the pine trees like a threadbare blanket. It was the kind of October morning that smelled of damp earth and decaying leaves, quiet except for the distant call of a crow and the rhythmic crunch of hiking boots on gravel. Sarah Mitchell pulled her fleece jacket tighter around her shoulders as she walked the trail she'd taken 100 times before. She came here to think, to escape the noise of her job at the hospital, to find some kind of peace in the stillness. But this morning, the stillness was broken. At first, she thought it was a dog. A flash of rust-colored fur appeared at the edge of the trail, moving in a jerky, desperate way. Sarah stopped, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. The animal hesitated, then took a few cautious steps toward her. Not a dog. A fox. A red fox, its coat matted and dull, its eyes wild but strangely focused on her. Sarah's heart began to pound. She'd seen foxes before, always at a distance, always retreating into the brush the moment they sensed a human. But this one didn't run. It limped closer, favoring its left front leg, and then it did something that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. It stopped 3 feet away, sat down heavily, and looked directly into her eyes. Not with fear, with pleading. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe and stay with us. "Hey," Sarah whispered, not sure why she was speaking to it. "What's wrong, buddy?" The fox didn't move. Its sides heaved with labored breaths, and now that it was closer, Sarah could see the problem. Around its neck, biting deep into the fur and skin, was a thick loop of fishing line, nearly invisible against the rust of its coat. The line had cut through layers of skin, and dried blood matted the fur around the wound. The fox's left paw hung at an awkward angle, swollen and discolored. Sarah felt her stomach turn. She was a trauma nurse. She'd seen plenty of wounds, plenty of suffering, but there was something about the fox's eyes that shook her. They were intelligent, aware, and they were asking for help. She crouched down slowly, making herself smaller, less threatening. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay, I see it. I see what's wrong." The fox didn't bolt. It remained seated, trembling slightly, watching her with an intensity that felt almost human. Sarah reached slowly for her phone, her hands shaking. Who'd you even call for something like this? Animal control? A vet? She had no idea if anyone would come out here, and even if they did, the fox might be long gone by then. But the fox didn't move. Sarah's mind raced. She thought about the supply kit she kept in her car, bandages, antiseptic, scissors. She was only a quarter-mile from the parking lot. Could she get back before the fox disappeared? And even if she did, would it let her near it again? The fox shifted slightly, and a low, pained whine escaped its throat. The sound was so raw, so vulnerable, that Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. She made a decision. "Stay here," she said, as if the fox could understand. "Please, just stay here." She stood slowly and began backing away, keeping her eyes on the animal. The fox watched her go, its ears swiveling to track her movement, but it didn't follow. It just sat there, trembling, waiting. Sarah turned and ran. Her boots slapped against the trail, her breath coming in sharp bursts. She nearly tripped over a root, but caught herself, her pulse hammering in her ears. The parking lot came into view, her silver Honda the only car there. She fumbled with her keys, yanked open the trunk, and grabbed the small first aid kit she kept for emergencies. Scissors, gauze, antiseptic spray. She stuffed everything into her jacket pockets and took off running back up the trail. Please still be there. Please. When she rounded the bend, her heart leapt. The fox was exactly where she'd left it, sitting in the same spot, its head turned toward the sound of her approach. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by a wave of anxiety. Now came the hard part. She approached slowly, her hands raised, her voice low and soothing. "Hey, it's okay. I'm here to help, I promise." The fox's ears flattened slightly, but it didn't run. Sarah knelt down about 5 feet away and carefully pulled out the scissors. The fox's eyes tracked the movement, its body tensing. "I know," Sarah whispered. "I know you're scared. I'm scared too." She inched closer. 4 feet, 3 feet. Close enough now to smell the musky wild scent of the animal, to see the rapid rise and fall of its chest. Close enough to see the angry, infected wound where the fishing line had soared into its neck. The fox's eyes never left hers. Sarah extended her hand slowly, palm down, letting the fox catch her scent. It leaned forward slightly, sniffing, and then, impossibly, it lowered its head just a fraction. An offering. A surrender. Sarah's throat tightened. She'd never experienced anything like this. Wild animals didn't do this. They didn't trust. They didn't ask. She moved her hand to the side of the fox's neck, her fingers trembling as they found the edge of the fishing line. The fox flinched but held still, a low whimper escaping its throat. Sarah's vision blurred with tears as she carefully slid the scissors under the line, feeling the tension of it, the way it had bitten so deeply into the flesh. "Almost there," she breathed. "Just hold on." With a single careful cut, the line snapped. The fox gasped, an audible, shuddering breath, and its entire body seemed to sag with relief. Sarah quickly pulled the line away, tossing it aside, and reached for the antiseptic spray. The fox didn't move as she gently cleaned the wound, wincing at the raw, angry skin beneath. When she was done, the fox looked at her again. This time there was something different in its eyes, something that looked impossibly like gratitude. And then it stood, slowly, painfully, and took a single step closer to her, close enough that Sarah could have touched its head, close enough that, for one breathless moment, she thought it might. But instead, the fox turned and limped back toward the tree line. It paused once, looking back over its shoulder, and then disappeared into the brush. Sarah sat there on the cold ground, her hands still shaking, her heart pounding, trying to process what had just happened. A wild animal had asked her for help, had trusted her, had let her save it. She gathered her supplies and stood, her legs unsteady, and began walking back toward her car. But something nagged at her. The fox's paw, the wound on its neck. It needed more help than she could give on a foggy trail. It needed a vet. It needed medicine. She needed to find that fox again. Sarah didn't go home. She sat in her car in the empty parking lot, the engine running, heat blasting through the vents, and stared at the trailhead. Her hands still smelled like antiseptic and the wild, musky scent of the fox. She couldn't shake the image of those eyes, amber and desperate and trusting in a way that defied every instinct a wild animal should have. She pulled out her phone and searched. Wildlife rehabilitation near me. 3 results appeared. She called the first number. Cascade Wildlife Center, this is Monica. "Hi, I just found an injured fox, a red fox. It has a bad wound on its neck and its front paw looks broken or dislocated. I got the fishing line off, but it needs real medical attention." There was a pause. "Did you say you got the fishing line off? From a wild fox?" "Yes. It let me. It came right up to me on the trail." Another pause, longer this time. "Ma'am, that's highly unusual behavior. Where is the fox now?" "It went back into the woods. But I think it's still nearby. The trailhead is at Morrison State Park, south entrance." "Okay, I can send someone out, but I need to be honest with you. If the fox ran off, the chances of us finding it are slim. Wild animals, even injured ones, are very good at hiding. And if it's exhibiting unusual behavior like approaching humans, we'd need to test it for rabies before—" "It's not rabid," Sarah said quickly. Too quickly. "I work in healthcare. I know what rabies looks like. This fox was just desperate." Monica's voice softened. "I believe you, but protocol is protocol. If we can locate it, we'll do what we can. In the meantime, if you see it again, please don't approach it. Call us immediately." Sarah thanked her and hung up. She knew they wouldn't find the fox. It was probably a mile away by now, hiding in some hollow log or beneath a tangle of roots, licking its wounds. Alone. The thought made her chest ache. She sat there for another 20 minutes, scanning the tree line, hoping for a flash of red fur. Nothing. Finally, reluctantly, she put the car in drive and headed home. Sarah's apartment was small and quiet. Too quiet. She'd lived alone for 3 years now, ever since the divorce. The walls were painted a neutral beige, the furniture minimal and practical. There were no photos on the walls, no personal touches that might suggest a life fully lived. Just books, a few potted plants that were struggling, and a view of the parking lot. She made tea she didn't drink and tried to distract herself with television, but her mind kept returning to the fox. She thought about its labored breathing, the way it had sat down so deliberately in front of her, the way it had asked. It reminded her of something, someone. Her younger brother Danny, when he was 8 years old and she was 16. He'd fallen out of a tree and broken his arm, and instead of crying or screaming, he'd just looked at her with these wide, trusting eyes and said, "Fix it, Sarah. You always fix things." She had. She'd splintered his arm with a fallen branch and her shoelaces, had walked him 2 miles to the nearest road, had flagged down a car to get him to the hospital. Their mother had been working a double shift. Their father had been gone for years by then. It had always been Sarah who fixed things, until she couldn't anymore. Danny had died 6 years ago, an overdose. She'd been working the night shift when the call came, and by the time she got to the hospital, her own hospital, it was already too late. She'd spent years trying to save people, trying to fix things, and she couldn't save her own brother. Sarah set down the tea and pressed her palms against her eyes. She hadn't thought about Danny in months. She'd gotten good at not thinking about him, at burying the grief so deep it only surfaced in dreams. But the fox had brought it all back, that look in its eyes, that plea for help. She grabbed her jacket. The park was darker now, the sun setting early as it did in October. Sarah parked in the same spot and walked the trail with a flashlight, moving slowly, scanning the brush on either side. She felt ridiculous. What was she even doing? The fox could be miles away. It could be dead by now, succumbed to infection or blood loss, but she had to try. She walked for an hour, calling softly into the trees, stopping every few minutes to listen. Nothing. Just the wind through the pines and the distant hoot of an owl. She was about to turn back when she heard it, a faint rustling in the underbrush to her left. She froze, aiming her flashlight toward the sound. 2 amber eyes reflected back at her. The fox. It was lying in a shallow depression beneath a fallen log, partially hidden by ferns. Its breathing was shallow, and the wound on its neck glistened wetly in the flashlight beam. When it saw her, it didn't run. It just watched. Too weak or too resigned to move. Sarah's heart broke. "Hey," she whispered, crouching down. "Hey, buddy. I came back." The fox's ears twitched. It made a soft, huffing sound. Not quite a growl, not quite a whine. Sarah moved closer, slowly, every muscle in her body tense. She half expected the fox to bolt, to disappear into the darkness, but it stayed where it was. When she was close enough, she could see that the wound had gotten worse. The edges were inflamed, and there was fresh blood seeping through the matted fur. "You need antibiotics," she said softly. "You need a vet." The fox blinked slowly, its gaze never leaving her face. Sarah made a decision that she knew was probably insane. She pulled off her fleece jacket and spread it on the ground beside the fox. Then, moving with excruciating slowness, she slid her hands beneath the animal's body. The fox stiffened, a low growl rumbling in its chest. "I know," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "I know you don't want this, but I can't leave you here to die." She lifted. The fox was lighter than she expected, its body all bone and fur. It struggled weakly, its claws scraping against her arms, but it didn't bite. Sarah wrapped it carefully in the jacket, cradling it against her chest, and began walking back toward the parking lot. Every step felt surreal. She was carrying a wild fox. A wild fox. It could bite her. It could have rabies. She could be arrested for this. But none of that mattered. All that mattered was the fragile weight in her arms and the faint, rapid heartbeat she could feel against her own chest. "You're going to be okay," she whispered into the darkness. "I promise." "You're going to be okay." The fox's head rested against her shoulder, its breathing shallow but steady, and for the first time in 6 years, Sarah felt something she thought she'd lost forever: purpose. She drove straight to the Cascade Wildlife Center, calling ahead to let them know she was coming. Monica met her at the door, her eyes widening when she saw the bundle in Sarah's arms. "You actually caught it." "It didn't run," Sarah said simply. Monica led her inside to a small examination room where a vet, a young man with kind eyes and steady hands, was already waiting. Sarah laid the fox gently on the table, unwrapping the jacket carefully. The fox lay still, its eyes half closed, too exhausted to fight. The vet examined it quickly, his expression growing more serious with each passing moment. "Severe infection, malnutrition, dehydration. The paw is dislocated, not broken." "That's good. We can fix that. But we'll need to keep him here for at least a week, maybe 2. "Him?" Sarah asked. "Yes, male. About 2 years old, I'd guess." The vet looked up at her. "You probably saved his life. Another day or 2 out there, and the infection would have killed him." Sarah felt her throat tighten. She reached out and gently touched the fox's head. Its fur was coarser than she expected, warm beneath her fingertips. The fox's eyes opened slightly, focusing on her one last time, before drifting closed again. Can I visit him?" Sarah asked. "While he's recovering." Monica and the vet exchanged a glance. "That's not usually how we do things," Monica said gently. "We try to minimize human contact with wild animals so they can be released back into—" "Please," Sarah said. The word came out more desperately than she intended. "Please, I need to know he's okay." Monica studied her for a long moment, and something in Sarah's expression must have convinced her, because she nodded. "Okay. You can visit, but just you, and only for short periods. We need him to stay wild." Sarah nodded, relief flooding through her. "Thank you." As she drove home that night, her arms scratched and aching, her jacket ruined and blood-stained, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Sarah visited the fox every day after her shift at the hospital. She would drive straight from the sterile fluorescent corridors, where she spent 12 hours navigating trauma and crisis, and trade them for the quiet warmth of the Wildlife Center's recovery ward. The contrast was jarring at first, the chaos of human suffering versus the peaceful stillness of healing animals. But after a few days, it became the part of her day she looked forward to most. The fox had been moved to a large recovery enclosure in the back of the facility. It was designed to mimic a natural environment: dirt floor, logs, rocks, a small shelter made to look like a hollow tree. Through the observation window, Sarah could watch him without disturbing his space. On the 3rd day, the vet, his name was Dr. Marcus Chen, found her standing at the window, her forehead pressed against the glass. "He's doing better," Marcus said, coming to stand beside her. "The antibiotics are working. The infection is receding, and we were able to relocate his paw. He'll have a limp for a while, maybe permanently, but he'll be able to hunt and survive in the wild." Sarah felt relief wash over her. "That's good. That's really good." Marcus was quiet for a moment, watching the fox. The animal was lying in a patch of artificial sunlight from the skylight above, grooming his injured paw with careful, deliberate licks. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said finally. "Why?" Sarah turned to look at him. "Why what? Why did you do it? Why did you come back for him? Why do you come here every day?" Marcus's voice was curious, not judgmental. "Most people would have called us and moved on. But you risked getting bitten, possibly getting rabies, breaking wildlife laws by transporting him yourself. You care about this fox like it's—" He paused, searching for the word. "Personal." Sarah looked back through the window. The fox had stopped grooming and was now staring directly at her, as if he knew she was there despite the one-way glass. "I had a brother," she said quietly. Danny, he died 6 years ago. Overdose. The words came easier than she expected. Maybe it was because Marcus was a stranger. Maybe it was because she was tired of carrying the weight alone. I was a nurse. I save people every day. But I couldn't save him. I didn't even know he needed saving until it was too late. Marcus didn't say anything, just listened. When that fox looked at me, Sarah continued, when he sat down in front of me and asked for help, I couldn't walk away, because someone needed me, and I could actually do something about it. Does that make sense? Yeah, Marcus said softly. It does. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the fox. Then Marcus cleared his throat. There's something you should know, he said, about the fishing line. We analyzed it, standard procedure for foreign objects we remove from animals. Sarah, that line wasn't accidental. She frowned. What do you mean? It was tied, knotted deliberately around his neck, like a snare. And it was tightened recently, within the last few days before you found him. This wasn't a case of an animal getting tangled in abandoned fishing gear. Someone did this to him on purpose. Sarah felt ice spread through her chest. What? Why would anyone? We don't know. Could be someone who saw him as a pest. Could be kids being cruel. Could be someone trying to trap him. Marcus's jaw tightened. We've reported it to the park rangers and local animal control, but without witnesses, there's not much they can do. Sarah looked back at the fox, and suddenly everything clicked into a darker focus. He hadn't just been injured. He'd been tortured. Someone had deliberately tried to hurt him, maybe kill him. And somehow, through pain and fear, he'd found the courage to approach a human, the very species that had hurt him, and ask for help. The thought made her feel sick. Could they come back? She asked. Whoever did this? Marcus hesitated. That's the other thing I need to tell you. When we release him, and we will release him, probably in another week, we'll take him far from where you found him. Different part of the state park, or possibly a different park entirely. Safer location. But Sarah, he turned to face her fully. You need to prepare yourself. He's a wild animal. Once we release him, that's it. You won't see him again. You can't follow him or try to keep track of him. That's not how this works. Sarah knew he was right. She'd known it from the beginning, but hearing it stated so plainly made her chest ache. I know, she said. I know that. But even as she said it, she wasn't sure she believed it. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the fishing line, about someone deliberately hurting the fox, about all the cruelty in the world that she couldn't fix, couldn't prevent, couldn't heal. She thought about Danny, about how she'd missed all the signs, the withdrawn behavior, the missed family dinners, the phone calls he never returned. She'd been so busy saving strangers that she'd failed to see her own brother drowning. At 2 a.m., she gave up on sleep and pulled out her laptop. She started researching, read fox behavior, fox rehabilitation, wildlife recovery success rates. She read about how foxes could remember individual humans, how they were highly intelligent and adaptable, how they formed complex social bonds. She found an article about a fox in England that had been rescued as a kit and released as an adult. Years later, the fox had returned to the property where it had been rehabilitated, bringing its own kits to show the woman who had saved it. Scientists called it impossible. The woman called it gratitude. Sarah knew she was projecting. She knew she was looking for meaning in something that was probably just instinct and circumstance. But she couldn't help herself. At 3 a.m., she found something else. A forum post from someone in the same county, dated 2 weeks ago. Has anyone else seen the traps in Morrison Park? Found 3 wire snares on the North Trails. Reported them to rangers, but they're still there. Be careful with your dogs. Sarah's blood ran cold. She scrolled through the replies. Other people had seen them too. One person posted photos, crude wire snares attached to trees and bushes, designed to tighten around an animal's neck when triggered. Someone was hunting in the park, illegally, and they'd caught her fox. The next morning, Sarah called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years. She drove to Morrison State Park and hiked every trail, her eyes scanning the underbrush. It took 3 hours, but she found 2 snares, one near the trail where she'd first met the fox, another a quarter-mile north. She photographed them, documented their locations, and then carefully dismantled them, stuffing the wire into a plastic bag. Her hands shook with anger as she worked. She drove straight to the ranger station and demanded to speak to someone. A tired-looking ranger named Kowalski listened to her story, examined the photos, and sighed heavily. "We know," he said. "We've been trying to catch whoever's doing this for months. We've removed dozens of snares, but they keep appearing. Whoever it is knows the patrol schedule and only sets them when we're not around." "So what are you doing about it?" Sarah demanded. "We've increased patrols, set up a few trail cameras, but it's a big park and we're understaffed." Kowalski looked genuinely regretful. "I'm sorry about the fox. I'm glad you were able to save it. But unless we catch this person in the act..." Sarah left feeling frustrated and helpless, but also determined. That afternoon, she returned to the wildlife center. Monica met her at the door with an odd expression. "He won't eat," she said without preamble. "What?" "The fox. He was eating fine for 3 days. We were giving him raw chicken, some mice we had frozen. But yesterday he stopped, won't touch anything, just lies in his shelter and stares at the door." Monica crossed her arms. "Marcus thinks it might be depression. It happens sometimes with wild animals in captivity, especially intelligent ones. They lose the will to survive." Sarah felt panic rise in her throat. "Can I see him?" Monica hesitated, then nodded. "Maybe that will help." She led Sarah not to the observation window, but to the enclosure itself. "We normally wouldn't do this," Monica said as she unlocked the door. "But at this point we're trying anything. Don't make sudden movements. Let him come to you if he wants to." Sarah stepped inside. The fox was lying in the artificial den, partially hidden in shadow. When he saw her, his ears perked up. Then, slowly, painfully, he emerged. Sarah knelt down, making herself small, and waited. The fox approached cautiously, limping on his relocated paw. He stopped a few feet away and sat down, just like he had on the trail that first morning. And then he did something that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. He lowered his head and made a soft chittering sound, a sound she'd read about but never heard. A sound foxes made when greeting family. "Hey," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "Hey, I'm here." The fox moved closer, close enough that she could have touched him. And for the first time since Danny died, Sarah felt tears stream freely down her face. Behind her, through the open door, she heard Monica's quiet voice. "He was waiting for you." Sarah started bringing food. Not the frozen mice or raw chicken the center provided, but fresh meat from the butcher, rabbit, quail, even venison when she could find it. She'd arrive after her shifts with small portions wrapped in brown paper, and she'd sit inside the enclosure while the fox ate, talking to him in a low, steady voice about nothing and everything. She told him about her day, about the patients she'd helped, about the traffic on the way over. She told him about Danny, about the guilt she carried, about how she'd built walls so high around herself that she'd forgotten what it felt like to let someone in. The fox would listen, his amber eyes fixed on her face, occasionally tilting his head as if he understood. And maybe, in some way, he did. Marcus warned her that she was getting too attached. "He needs to be wild, Sarah," he said gently one evening, finding her sitting on the floor of the enclosure with the fox curled a few feet away. "He can't become dependent on humans. That's a death sentence for an animal like him." "I know," Sarah said, but she didn't stop visiting. Monica was more understanding. "I've worked with wildlife for 15 years, she told Sarah one afternoon, "and I've seen this happen before. An animal and a person form a connection that transcends normal boundaries. It's rare, but it's real. That fox chose you, Sarah. On that trail, when he was dying, he could have hidden. He could have gone deeper into the woods, but he came to you. That means something." "What happens when we release him?" Sarah asked, her voice small. Monica's expression was kind but firm. Then you let him go. That's the only way this ends well." 10 days after Sarah had first carried the fox into the center, Marcus declared him healthy enough for release. His paw has healed well. He's got about 80% mobility, which is enough. The wound on his neck is closed and no longer at risk of infection. He's regained weight. He's exhibiting normal hunting behaviors with the live prey we've introduced. Marcus looked at Sarah carefully. "He's ready." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "When?" "Day after tomorrow, early morning. We'll transport him to Redwood Valley State Park. It's about 40 miles north, less human traffic, no reports of snares. He'll have a good chance there." Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. "You can be there," Marcus added quietly. "For the release, if you want." "I want," Sarah managed. That night, Sarah did something she knew was probably wrong. She stopped by the wildlife center after hours. Monica had given her a key weeks ago, trusting her. And now Sarah used it to let herself into the quiet building. The fox was sleeping when she entered his enclosure, but he woke immediately, his ears swiveling toward the sound of the door. When he saw her, he stood, stretched, and trotted over with that distinctive limping gait. Sarah sat down on the floor, and the fox did something he'd never done before. He came close enough to press his shoulder against her knee. Sarah reached out slowly and touched his head, her fingers threading through the coarse red fur. The fox closed his eyes, leaning into the contact. "You're going home," Sarah whispered. "Day after tomorrow, they're taking you somewhere safe. Somewhere with trees and streams and other foxes. Somewhere you can be what you're supposed to be." The fox made that soft, chittering sound again. "I won't be able to visit you there," Sarah continued, her voice thick. "I won't be able to make sure you're eating or check on your paw. You'll be on your own again, and that's good. That's how it should be. But I need you to know—" She paused, struggling with the words. "I need you to know that you saved me too. You reminded me that I can still do this, that I can still help, that I'm not broken." The fox opened his eyes and looked at her, and Sarah could have sworn she saw understanding there. She stayed for an hour, just sitting with him in the quiet darkness, memorizing the weight of his presence, the sound of his breathing, the amber glow of his eyes in the dim light filtering through the skylight. When she finally left, the fox watched her go from the center of the enclosure, his gaze following her until she closed the door. Sarah couldn't sleep that night either, but this time it wasn't anxiety that kept her awake. It was an idea, a plan that was probably stupid and definitely obsessive, but one she couldn't shake. If someone was still setting snares in Morrison Park, they could just as easily set them in Redwood Valley, or any other park. The fox would be released, and within days or weeks he could end up in another trap, could go through the same suffering all over again. And next time there might not be someone there to help, unless someone stopped the person setting the traps. Sarah opened her laptop and pulled up everything she'd saved about the snares. The photos, the forum posts, the ranger reports. She created a document, organized by date and location. A pattern emerged. The snares appeared most frequently on weekday mornings, between Tuesday and Thursday. They were concentrated in the more remote sections of the park, away from the popular trails, and they were always removed or reset quickly. Whoever was setting them was checking them regularly. Sarah pulled up the trail camera footage the rangers had shared with her when she'd filed her report. Most of it was useless: deer, raccoons, the occasional hiker. But in one clip from 3 weeks ago, there was something else. A figure in dark clothing and a baseball cap moving quickly through the frame, carrying something that could have been wire or rope. The timestamp was 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. She checked the calendar. Tomorrow was Tuesday. At 5:30 a.m., Sarah was parked at Morrison State Park, a thermos of coffee in her cup holder and a pair of binoculars on the passenger seat. She felt ridiculous, like she was in some kind of amateur detective movie, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this mattered, that if she could just catch whoever was doing this, she could prevent it from happening again. The sun rose slowly, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Sarah watched the trailhead, her eyes scanning every vehicle that entered the parking lot. A few early morning joggers, a woman walking her dog, an elderly couple with hiking poles. At 6:30, a white pickup truck pulled in. A man got out, middle-aged, wearing camouflage pants and a dark jacket, a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He glanced around, then walked quickly toward the North Trail, carrying a canvas bag. Sarah's heart hammered. She waited 30 seconds, then got out of her car and followed at a distance. The man moved with purpose, leaving the main trail after a quarter-mile and pushing into the underbrush. Sarah stayed back, using trees for cover, her phone in her hand with the camera ready. She watched as he knelt beside a thick bush and pulled wire from his bag. Watched as he constructed a snare with practiced efficiency, attaching it low to the ground where an animal would trigger it. Watched as he set another one 20 feet away, and then another. Sarah's hands shook as she filmed, making sure to capture his face, his vehicle, his actions. When he finished and started back toward the trail, she ducked behind a large pine tree, holding her breath, as he passed within 10 feet of her position. She waited until he was out of sight, then checked the video. Clear footage. Undeniable evidence. She called Ranger Kowalski immediately. Within an hour, the man was stopped at his truck by 2 rangers and a county sheriff's deputy. Sarah watched from a distance as they questioned him, searched his vehicle, found more wire and several dead animals, squirrels, a raccoon, and, heartbreakingly, a young fox. Sarah felt sick, but she also felt vindicated. The man was arrested. His name was Dale Sutton, and according to Kowalski, he had priors for illegal trapping and animal cruelty in 2 other counties. He'd been banned from several state parks, but kept moving around, setting snares wherever he thought he could get away with it. "You did good," Kowalski told Sarah as they watched Sutton being loaded into the police car. "Really good. This guy's been on our radar for months, but we could never catch him in the act. Your footage is going to put him away." Sarah nodded, but she felt strangely hollow. Catching Sutton didn't undo what had been done. It didn't erase the suffering of all the animals who died in his snares. It didn't change the fact that the world was full of people who hurt the vulnerable without consequence. But it was something. It was action. It was justice. And maybe that was enough. The next morning, Sarah drove to the wildlife center before dawn. Marcus and Monica were already loading the fox into a transport crate designed to minimize stress. Dark, padded, with air holes and soft bedding. The fox looked at Sarah through the mesh, his eyes calm, almost peaceful. "Ready?" Marcus asked. Sarah took a deep breath. "Ready." They drove north in a convoy, Marcus's van with the fox, Sarah following in her car, Monica bringing up the rear with additional supplies. The sun rose as they drove, flooding the highway with golden light. Redwood Valley was beautiful, old-growth forest, a winding creek, meadows thick with wildflowers just beginning their autumn fade. Marcus pulled off onto a service road and drove deep into the park until they reached a clearing near the creek. "This is it," he said. "No recent human activity. Good water source, plenty of prey. He'll do well here." They lifted the crate from the van and carried it to the edge of the clearing. Marcus checked the area one final time, then knelt beside the crate's door. "Sarah," he said, "you should be the one to open it." Sarah's throat tightened. She knelt beside Marcus and placed her hand on the latch. Through the mesh, she could see the fox watching her, waiting. "Be safe," she whispered. "Be smart. Be wild." And then she opened the door. For a long moment, nothing happened. The fox sat inside the crate, perfectly still, his amber eyes fixed on Sarah's face. The door was open. Freedom was 3 feet away, but he didn't move. "It's okay," Sarah whispered. "You can go." The fox tilted his head, that same curious gesture she'd seen 100 times in the enclosure. Then, slowly, he stood and stepped out of the crate. But he didn't run. He walked directly to Sarah and sat down in front of her, just as he had that first morning on the foggy trail. Sarah felt tears blur her vision. "No, buddy, you have to go. This is your home now. You're free." The fox leaned forward and touched his nose to her hand, a brief, deliberate contact that sent a shock of warmth through her entire body. Then he turned and trotted toward the tree line, his limp barely noticeable now. Sarah watched him go, her chest aching, telling herself this was right, this was good, this was how it was supposed to end. The fox reached the edge of the clearing and paused. He looked back over his shoulder, his russet coat brilliant in the morning sun, his tail a dark-tipped banner. For 3 heartbeats, their eyes met across the distance, and then he disappeared into the forest. Sarah stood there, rooted to the spot, staring at the place where he'd vanished. She felt Marcus's hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. Sarah nodded, but couldn't speak. She was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face, mourning the loss of something she'd never really had, something that had been temporary from the very beginning. Monica handed her a tissue. "He'll be okay. You gave him a second chance. That's enormous." They packed up the crate and started walking back toward the vehicles. Sarah took one last look at the forest, hoping for a glimpse of red fur, but there was nothing, just trees and shadow and the distant sound of the creek. They were halfway back when they heard it, a sharp, panicked yelping that cut through the morning air like a knife. Sarah froze. "That's him!" "Sarah, wait!" Marcus started, but she was already running. She crashed through the underbrush, following the sound, her heart hammering in her chest. Behind her she could hear Marcus and Monica shouting, trying to keep up. The yelping grew louder, more desperate, and then suddenly it stopped. Sarah burst into a small ravine, and her blood turned to ice. The fox was there, backed against a rocky outcropping, his body low and defensive, and facing him, not 20 feet away, was a coyote, lean, rangy, and twice the fox's size. Its lips were pulled back in a snarl, revealing yellow teeth. The fox was trapped. The ravine walls were too steep to climb on his injured paw, and the coyote was blocking the only way out. "Hey!" Sarah shouted without thinking. "Hey!" The coyote's head snapped toward her, its eyes cold and calculating. For a moment, Sarah saw herself through its eyes. Just another animal, no claws, no fangs, no real threat. The coyote took a step toward her. Sarah grabbed a fallen branch and held it like a club, her hands shaking. "Get back!" The coyote growled, a low rumble that vibrated in Sarah's chest. It took another step, and then the fox moved. He darted forward with shocking speed, placing himself between Sarah and the coyote, his fur standing on end, his teeth bared. He was half the coyote's size and injured, but he didn't hesitate. He snarled, a sound Sarah had never heard him make, something primal and fierce, and snapped at the air. The coyote paused, surprised. It had been focused on easy prey, on a wounded fox, cornered and helpless. It hadn't expected resistance, hadn't expected a second threat. Marcus burst into the ravine behind Sarah, shouting and waving his arms. Monica was right behind him, blowing a whistle that echoed off the rocks. The coyote's ears flattened. It took a step back, reassessing. 2 humans and a fox willing to fight made it not worth the risk. With a final snarl, the coyote turned and loped away, disappearing into the dense undergrowth. Sarah's legs nearly gave out. She dropped the branch and sank to her knees, her whole body trembling with adrenaline. The fox turned to look at her, his sides heaving, and made that soft chittering sound again. "You—" Sarah couldn't find the words. "You protected me." Marcus knelt beside her, his face pale. Jesus, that was close. Coyotes don't usually come this close to humans, but that one looked young, probably inexperienced. Still, he looked at the fox with something like awe. "He put himself between you and a predator twice his size. That's not normal fox behavior." The fox limped over to Sarah and sat down heavily beside her, as if the encounter had drained him of whatever strength he'd regained. Sarah put her hand on his back, feeling his rapid heartbeat, the warmth of his body. "We need to go," Monica said, scanning the tree line. That coyote might come back, or there might be others. This isn't a safe release site. We can't just leave him here, Sarah said immediately. Marcus and Monica exchanged a long look. There's another site, Marcus said finally. About an hour north, more remote, less predator pressure. But Sarah... He crouched down to meet her eyes. You have to understand. We can't keep doing this. We can't keep taking him to new places and hoping it works. At some point he has to survive on his own. That's the only way this ends. I know, Sarah said, but her hand didn't leave the fox's back. They drove to the second site in tense silence. The fox was back in his crate, but this time Sarah rode in the van with Marcus, unable to let the animal out of her sight. She kept her fingers pressed against the mesh, and the fox pressed his nose against them from the other side. I need to tell you something, Marcus said, as they drove through increasingly remote forest roads, about release protocols. The reason we usually don't let the rescuer be present is because, well, because of this. The attachment. It makes it harder for everyone. I needed to be here, Sarah said quietly. I know. But Sarah, you have to be prepared for the possibility that he won't make it. Even in ideal conditions, rehabilitated wildlife has only about a 60% survival rate in the first year. With his injury, with his limited experience hunting in the wild, Marcus's voice was gentle but honest. The odds aren't great. Sarah watched the fox through the mesh. He watched her back, his eyes steady and calm despite everything that had just happened. He's a fighter, she said. He survived that snare. He survived the infection. He survived a coyote attack. If any animal can make it, he can. Marcus smiled sadly. I hope you're right. The second site was everything the first wasn't. A vast expanse of old forest with thick underbrush, multiple water sources and minimal human presence. They'd passed a locked gate 3 miles back, and Marcus explained this was a restricted zone, open only to researchers and wildlife management. No hunting, no traps, no unauthorized access, he said, as they unloaded the crate. If he can't make it here, he can't make it anywhere. They carried the crate to a secluded clearing surrounded by dense thickets and rocky outcroppings. Plenty of places for a fox to den, plenty of cover from predators. The afternoon sun filtered through the canopy in golden shafts, and the air smelled of pine and earth and possibility. Monica checked the area thoroughly this time, walking the perimeter, scanning for threats. When she returned, she nodded. Clear. This is as good as it gets. Sarah knelt by the crate door again. Her hand shook as she reached for the latch. Thank you, she said to the fox, her voice breaking, for everything, for trusting me, for reminding me that that I can still... She couldn't finish. The words were too big, too tangled with grief and gratitude and love she had no right to feel for a wild animal. The fox pressed against the mesh, and Sarah pressed back. Then she opened the door. This time, the fox hesitated for only a moment. He stepped out of the crate, stretched his legs and sniffed the air. His ears swiveled, cataloguing sounds Sarah couldn't hear. His nose twitched, reading scents she couldn't smell. He was home. She could see it in the way his body changed, the way his posture shifted from cautious to curious. This was what he'd been born for. This was where he belonged. The fox turned to look at her one last time, and then, without warning, he trotted back to her and pressed his forehead against her knee. One brief, impossible moment of connection. Go, Sarah whispered. Be safe, be happy, be free. The fox chittered softly, a sound like goodbye, and then he was gone, melting into the undergrowth with a grace that belied his injury, vanishing so completely it was as if he'd never been there at all. Sarah stayed kneeling in the clearing long after Marcus and Monica had started packing up the equipment. She stared at the spot where the fox had disappeared, feeling the absence of him like a physical weight. He's going to make it, Monica said, coming to stand beside her. I've done this for 15 years, and I've learned to trust my gut. That fox, your fox, he's a survivor. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. As they walked back to the vehicles, Sarah felt something shift inside her chest. Not closure exactly, but something like acceptance. She'd done everything she could. She'd saved him, healed him, protected him, and set him free. The rest was up to him. And maybe that was the lesson all along. That sometimes love meant letting go, that sometimes helping meant stepping back, that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was trust that you'd done enough. Sarah went back to work the next day. She pulled a double shift at the hospital, throwing herself into the chaos of the emergency room with an intensity that surprised even her. She sutured wounds, started IVs, held the hands of frightened patients, and spoke in calm, steady tones to people whose worlds were falling apart. But something was different. Before, she'd moved through her shifts with efficient detachment, a protective barrier between herself and the suffering around her. She'd learned early that you couldn't save everyone, that emotional investment was a liability, that the only way to survive as a trauma nurse was to care just enough, but not too much. But now that barrier was gone. When a teenage boy came in with a broken arm from skateboarding, Sarah found herself thinking about Danny at that age, about the trust in his eyes when he'd said, "Fix it, Sarah." And instead of pushing the memory away like she always did, she let it sit. She bandaged the boy's arm with extra care, made sure he understood the discharge instructions, and told him to be more careful because someone out there loved him and would be devastated if anything happened to him. The boy's mother had thanked her with tears in her eyes. When an elderly woman came in after a fall, confused and frightened, Sarah sat with her for 20 minutes after treating her injuries, just holding her hand and talking about nothing. About the weather, about the flowers blooming outside, about the woman's cat waiting at home. It wasn't efficient, it wasn't necessary, but it mattered. Her colleague, Denise, noticed. "You okay?" she asked during their break. "You seem different." Sarah considered the question. Was she okay? She was exhausted. Her heart hurt. She kept thinking about a fox she'd never see again, wondering if he was hunting successfully, if his paw was holding up, if he was safe. But she was also more present than she'd been in years, more alive. "Yeah," Sarah said finally, "I think I am." The days turned into weeks. Sarah continued visiting the wildlife center, but now she volunteered. She helped with feeding schedules, cleaned enclosures, assisted Marcus with examinations. She met other animals, an injured owl, a baby raccoon whose mother had been hit by a car, a deer with a broken leg. She couldn't save them all. The owl died despite their best efforts, its injuries too severe. The raccoon thrived and was released. The deer recovered, but would never be able to return to the wild and was transferred to a sanctuary. Each case taught her something. That effort mattered even when outcomes didn't go as planned. That some creatures could be saved and some couldn't. But the attempt itself had value. That healing, whether for animals or humans or herself, was rarely straightforward. Monica took her aside one afternoon. "You're good at this," she said. "Have you ever thought about becoming a licensed wildlife rehabilitator? We could use someone like you." Sarah was surprised by how much the idea appealed to her. "I'd have to take classes, get certified." "So take classes, get certified." Monica smiled. "You've got the instincts for it, the patience, the ability to stay calm under pressure, and you actually care, Sarah. That matters more than you'd think." Sarah promised to consider it. At night, alone in her apartment, Sarah found herself doing something she hadn't done in years. She started writing. Not anything formal or structured, just thoughts and memories and feelings she'd kept locked away for too long. She wrote about Danny, about the guilt she'd carried, the belief that she'd failed him. But she also wrote about the good memories, teaching him to ride a bike, helping him with homework, the way he'd laugh at stupid jokes. She wrote about how grief had made her smaller, more closed off, more afraid, and she wrote about the fox, about those amber eyes looking at her with trust, about the weight of him in her arms as she'd carried him to safety, about the moment he'd put himself between her and the coyote, choosing to protect her when every instinct should have told him to run. She wrote, Maybe saving something isn't about fixing everything that's broken. Maybe it's just about showing up when it matters, about doing what you can with what you have, about being brave enough to try even when you know you might fail. The fox taught me that. Or maybe I taught myself, and the fox was just the mirror I needed to see it. Adi. 6 weeks after the release, Sarah drove back to Redwood Valley. She knew it was irrational. The chances of seeing the fox were essentially zero. He could be miles away by now, could have established a territory in any direction. He was wild and free, living the life he was meant to live. But she had to go anyway. She hiked for hours, following game trails and creek beds, scanning the forest for any sign of red fur. She saw deer, squirrels, a family of quail scurrying through the underbrush. But no foxes. As the sun began to set, Sarah sat on a fallen log in the clearing where they'd released him and let herself feel the full weight of her grief, not just for the fox, but for Danny, for all the losses she'd never properly mourned, for the person she'd been before the weight of the world had taught her to stop feeling so much. She cried until she had no tears left, and when she was done, she felt lighter, emptied out, but also cleansed. The forest around her was growing dark, shadows lengthening between the trees. It was time to go. Sarah stood and started walking back toward the trailhead. She was almost out of the clearing when she heard it. A soft, chittering sound from somewhere behind her. She froze. Slowly, she turned around. At the edge of the clearing, partially hidden in the twilight shadows, stood a fox. Red fur, dark-tipped tail, slightly favoring his left front paw. Sarah's heart stopped. "It can't be," she whispered. The fox sat down, watching her with eyes that glowed amber in the fading light. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Sarah was afraid to breathe, afraid that any movement would shatter the moment and prove it was just a trick of the light, just her desperate mind, seeing what it wanted to see. But the fox didn't vanish. He tilted his head in that familiar way, and Sarah felt something crack open inside her chest. "Hi," she said, her voice breaking. "I was hoping. I didn't think I'd ever—" The fox stood and took a few steps toward her, not all the way, maintaining the distance of a wild creature, a boundary that was right and necessary, but close enough that Sarah could see him clearly, close enough to know with absolute certainty that it was him. He looked good. His coat was thick and glossy, his eyes bright and alert. The wound on his neck had healed to a thin scar, barely visible beneath his fur. His limp was still there, but subtle, not hindering his movement. He'd survived. More than that, he'd thrived. "You're okay," Sarah breathed. "You're really okay." The fox made that chittering sound again, and Sarah laughed through fresh tears. They stayed like that for several minutes, just looking at each other across the clearing. Sarah didn't try to approach him, didn't call to him, or make any move to close the distance. This wasn't about possession or control. It was just about knowing, about witnessing, about one moment of grace that proved all the effort and fear and heartbreak had been worth it. Finally, the fox turned and trotted back toward the tree line. But before he disappeared, he paused and looked back over his shoulder one last time, a gesture that felt like acknowledgement, like gratitude, like goodbye. And then he was gone. Sarah stood in the darkening clearing, her face wet with tears, her heart so full it ached. She'd come looking for closure, for proof that letting go had been the right choice. What she'd found was something better, evidence that love didn't have to mean holding on, that sometimes the greatest gift you could give was freedom, that healing was possible, even for the most wounded among us. Sarah drove home in the dark, her mind quiet for the first time in weeks. When she got to her apartment, she didn't turn on the television or lose herself in distractions. Instead, she pulled out her laptop and searched for wildlife rehabilitation certification programs. She found one that started in the spring. The application was extensive: background check, references, essay questions about why she wanted to do this work. Sarah opened a blank document and began typing. 6 months ago, I stopped believing I could save anyone. I'd lost someone I loved to a battle I didn't know he was fighting, and that loss convinced me that trying to help was pointless, that caring too much was dangerous, that the world was full of wounds too deep to heal. And then a dying fox looked at me and asked for help, and I realized I'd been wrong about everything. This is my application to become a licensed wildlife rehabilitator, not because I think I can save every animal, but because I've learned that showing up matters, that effort matters, that even when outcomes are uncertain, the attempt itself has value. I want to be the person who shows up, who tries, who cares enough to act even when success isn't guaranteed. A fox taught me that. Now I want to pass it forward. She finished the application at 2 a.m. and submitted it before she could second-guess herself. Then she went to bed and, for the first time in 6 years, slept deeply and dreamlessly until morning. Spring came to the valley like a whisper. Sarah watched the world wake up from her apartment window. Trees budding, flowers pushing through winter-hard soil, birds returning with their morning songs. The world was renewing itself, and for the first time in years, Sarah felt like she was renewing along with it. Her acceptance letter from the Wildlife Rehabilitation Program arrived in March, and by April she was deep into coursework, learning about animal nutrition, disease prevention, ethical release protocols, legal requirements. She studied at night after her hospital shifts, her dining table covered with textbooks and notes, a thermos of coffee always within reach. It was exhausting. It was exhilarating. Monica let her take on more responsibilities at the center. Sarah started handling intake assessments, administering medications, even assisting with minor surgeries. She learned to read the subtle signs of stress in wild animals, to move with the quiet confidence that kept them calm, to know when to push for survival and when to let go with dignity. She saved some. She lost some. Each one mattered. One Saturday in May, Sarah was cleaning out a recovery enclosure when Marcus found her with an odd expression on his face. "There's someone here to see you," he said. Well, not someone exactly. Sarah followed him to the intake area, her heart already beginning to pound. A park ranger she didn't recognize was standing by the front desk, holding a transport crate. "Are you Sarah Mitchell?" the ranger asked. "Yes. I'm Ranger Patterson from Redwood Valley. I've got an unusual situation." He gestured to the crate. "Found this guy caught in some brambles up in the restricted zone. Got himself pretty tangled trying to catch a rabbit. He's not badly hurt, mostly just exhausted from struggling, but when we freed him, he wouldn't leave, just sat there looking at us. Then my partner noticed this." Patterson pulled out his phone and showed Sarah a photo. A fox with red fur, a distinctive scar on his neck, slightly favoring his left front paw. Sarah's breath caught. "That's him. That's what we thought. We checked the microchip. You know we chip all releases. And it came back registered to this facility, released 7 weeks ago." Patterson smiled slightly. "The weird part is, when we were trying to figure out what to do, I said your name. Just mentioned that Sarah Mitchell had been the one who found him originally, and I swear to God his ears perked up. So I figured, what the hell, maybe she'd want to check him out before we re-release him." Sarah was already moving toward the crate. The fox was lying down, his eyes half closed, but when she knelt beside the mesh, those amber eyes opened and focused on her with immediate recognition. He made that soft, chittering sound, and Sarah felt tears blur her vision. "Hey, you," she whispered. "What did you get yourself into this time?" Marcus examined the fox quickly and efficiently. "He's fine, dehydrated, tired, few scratches, but nothing serious. Probably just needs rest and fluids. We can keep him overnight and release him back tomorrow." "Can I stay with him?" Sarah asked. Marcus and Monica exchanged one of their looks. "Sarah," Monica said gently, "you can't keep doing this. Every time he has a problem, you can't—" "I know," Sarah interrupted. I know I can't save him from every danger. I know he's wild, and this is his life, and I can't protect him from everything. But just tonight, please, just let me make sure he's okay." Monica sighed, but she was smiling. Just tonight, Sarah sat with the fox in the quiet recovery room as evening settled over the center. She'd given him water and small pieces of chicken, which he'd eaten eagerly, and now he was resting, his head on his paws, watching her with those intelligent, knowing eyes. "You keep scaring me," Sarah told him. "First the snare, then the coyote, now brambles. You've got to be more careful." The fox blinked slowly, unbothered by the lecture. Sarah leaned back against the wall, suddenly exhausted. "I got into the rehabilitation program," she said. "I'm going to do this for real, help animals like you, like the owl we couldn't save, like all the ones who come through here broken and scared and just need someone to care." The fox shifted slightly, moving a few inches closer to where she sat. "I went to Danny's grave last week," Sarah continued, the words coming easier now. "First time in 2 years. I told him I was sorry I couldn't save him, but that I was trying to save others now, trying to show up for people and animals who need help. I think he'd like that. I think he'd be proud." A tear rolled down her cheek, but it wasn't the heavy, suffocating grief she'd carried for so long. It was lighter now, bitter-sweet, but bearable. "You helped me figure that out," she said to the fox. "When you came to me that morning, when you trusted me despite everything humans had done to you, you reminded me why I became a nurse in the first place. Not to save everyone, just to show up, to try, to care when caring feels impossible." The fox closed his eyes, his breathing deep and even. Sarah watched him sleep, memorizing the rise and fall of his chest, the twitching of his ears, the way the scars on his neck had healed into thin silver lines beneath his red fur. She knew this wasn't sustainable, knew she couldn't be there for every crisis, every injury, every moment of danger in his wild life, but maybe that was okay. Maybe loving something meant doing what you could when you could, and then trusting that you'd given them the tools to survive the rest on their own. The next morning, Ranger Patterson returned to transport the fox back to Redwood Valley. Sarah helped load the crate into the truck, her hands steady despite the ache in her chest. "He's going to keep getting into trouble, isn't he?" she asked. Patterson laughed. "Probably. He's a fox. It's what they do." He paused, his expression turning serious. "But for what it's worth, I've been working in that park for 12 years, and I've never seen a fox thriving like this one. Despite the limp, despite the scars, he's establishing territory, hunting successfully, even been spotted with a mate a few weeks ago." Sarah's heart lifted. "A mate? Yep, pretty little vixen. They've been seen together regularly. Wouldn't surprise me if there are kits come next spring." Patterson smiled. "Your fox is doing more than surviving, Ms. Mitchell. He's living." Sarah stood in the parking lot long after the ranger's truck disappeared down the road. The morning was bright and warm, full of birdsong and the scent of blooming flowers. Somewhere 40 miles north, a fox was being released back into his forest, back to his territory and his mate and his wild, dangerous, beautiful life. She would probably never see him again, and that was how it should be. Sarah pulled out her phone and called Denise from the hospital. "Hey," she said when her colleague answered. "Remember how you said the ER was looking for someone to run those trauma support groups for families dealing with loss?" "Yeah, why?" "I want to do it." There was a surprised pause. "Really? Sarah, those groups are intense. Lots of emotional labor. Are you sure you're—" "I'm sure," Sarah said, and she was. "I think I finally have something to offer. Not answers, not solutions, just presence, understanding, the knowledge that showing up matters even when you can't fix everything." "Okay," Denise said, warmth flooding her voice. "Yeah, okay. I'll put your name forward." 6 months later, on a crisp October morning, Sarah stood at the same trailhead where everything had begun. She'd just completed her wildlife rehabilitation certification. She was running 2 support groups at the hospital. She'd started volunteering at a grief counseling center on weekends. Her apartment had photos on the walls now, pictures of Danny, of her parents, of the animals she'd helped save, evidence of a life being lived instead of just endured. She walked the familiar trail, her eyes scanning the forest, not with desperate hope, but with gentle awareness. She didn't need to see the fox to know he was out there somewhere, didn't need proof to believe that their brief intersection had mattered. But halfway down the trail she stopped. In the middle of the path, positioned deliberately where she couldn't miss it, was a feather. Russet red, tipped with white and black, a foxtail feather, shed naturally and left like a gift. Sarah picked it up, turning it carefully in her fingers. It could have been from any fox, could have been coincidence, could have been just the wind and chance. But Sarah chose to believe otherwise. She tucked the feather into her jacket pocket and continued walking, a smile on her face, her heart full of gratitude for the wounded animal who had taught her how to heal, for the unexpected compassion that had saved them both, for the reminder that even in the darkest moments, even when everything feels broken, there is still hope. There are still second chances. There is still love worth the risk of trying. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and if you've ever witnessed or lived something like this.